So let me unpack a word or two in here, okay? When I say we demonstrate personal commitment to, I just mean to point out the simple fact, and again, this is for parents who are married. I realize that there are situations where there's single parents. But when there's a marriage and family, as is the ideal, right? I think biblically, there's dedication to the good of the spouse. I don't have to unpack that again. We've talked about that. But what I want to point out here is dedication to the good of the spouse brings security to the children. It brings security to the children. Why is that? Because it forges a worldview that includes covenant faithfulness. Okay? In other words, they've seen what a covenant is and how it operates. There's an indissolubility to it. There's an unassailability to it. It can't be broken. Kids who have a solid sense that their parents love each other and are dedicated to each other are in a much better and more stable position to believe that their parents love them and are dedicated to them. It gives them a living picture of self-sacrifice to the benefit of another. And they will translate that to their perceptions of their own relationship with their parents. And by the way, we do have to say that if children do go through a divorce, while we recognize that honestly the awful effects that it has on them and their worldview, the pain, the emotional instability it brings, those effects are very real, and we need to take those seriously and talk to people as they're processing a divorce about those things. But we also have to say that God can heal, and God can give a kid a stable soul even though they're from a divorced family. Okay? So I just mention that to say, just because a kid's from a divorced home doesn't mean that he'll never understand the concept of covenant faithfulness and always be screwed up. Okay? That's not what I'm saying. Okay? So commitment to one's spouse is very important in establishing a worldview that involves commitment for the child. Okay? And then the other one I want to unpack here is demonstrate personal commitment to and enjoyment of one's spouse before the children. So in other words, they should know that you're happy to be around your wife or your husband. This is what makes a commitment believable to them. So this kind of touches on the whole hypocrisy thing. You could be committed all you want to not cheating on your spouse and staying with a marriage and making sure bills are paid together and all the rest of that stuff. But if there's not a genuine enjoyment and love for one another, kids are going to see through it. Okay? And so that's a goal for the parent to pursue. That's very similar to what we've been talking about loving each other. So there's the goal, and the hope is that they would find this security for themselves. That they would be positioned well to have the categories to understand God's love and faithfulness to them. That it is a commitment that is also a delighted commitment. Jesus doesn't love us begrudgingly. Okay? Next goal. Demonstrate personal commitment to and enjoyment of the children themselves. This is a typo here, through generous provision, loving pursuit, and consistent discipline. Through generous provision, loving pursuit, and consistent discipline. We'll talk about each one of those things. There's a list of 3 things there. But the hope for the child is that children would be equipped with the moral framework they need to function with wisdom, integrity, and confidence in the world. That's the result that we hope for out of a commitment and enjoyment that expresses itself in these 3 ways. So, let me unpack some of these things. I have a whole separate lecture on discipline, so I don't think we'll be able to have time to get into that, but maybe I can mention a few things about each. So 1 Thessalonians 2, as I referred to earlier, I want to point out another couple things about these other verses. Okay, in the context of being like a nursing mother and a caring father, Paul says, we were being affectionately desirous for you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. We work night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct for you believers. Okay? So they worked hard in order to provide for certain things for the Thessalonians, and that was a fatherly and a motherly thing to do. Okay? The other 2 go-to verses regarding parenting, Colossians 3:21, fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. And then Ephesians 6:4, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So these 3 things, I think, are how we carry out the spirit of these verses. So let me just break them down in terms of generous provision first. Parents work hard to provide what their children need for living and functioning well. Parents work hard for providing what their children need for living and functioning well. Now, this is hard because in our affluent society, the line between needs and wants is not always clear. What does a child actually need, and what's just a want? What's the standard of how much education you should provide for them? Does a parent have to send their kid to private school or homeschool them, or is public school acceptable? Do you need 2 cars to function? Can you do 1 car? How new should the kids' clothes be? How important is it for them, their sense of self, to have new-ish clothes? These are the types of questions you ask only in an affluent society like ours. So then the line between needs and wants is not always clear. But the point is, a father and a mother work hard to make sure that food, shelter, I think the basic ability to be where they need to be, so transportation. These basics of life are provided. So a child, the stuff necessary for a child to grow up healthy and secure. So there's a generous provision. A lot of the counseling you are going to be doing is going to be to low-income families. And they're going to have a hard time making ends meet. And many of them are going to have to need assistance from the church, and probably are already getting assistance from the government. Okay? It is not a failure to provide for one's family, and you shouldn't rebuke people in counseling if they're receiving help from the government or from the church necessarily. Okay? It's not necessarily sin. It's not necessarily wrong. It can be a good and even a necessary thing according to the circumstances and situation. So hear me say that. But it is also true that sometimes you will have families that have parents that are relying on charity from whatever source over much. In other words, here's the test, here's the gauge. Are they laboring and are they working hard to the best of their capacities to provide for their children? If they're not, and they just enjoy kind of having a relatively poor but trouble-free and easy lifestyle, that's a problem. That's not loving children in the way that God has called men and women to love their children, to provide for their families. Okay? So it's not always clear, and you got to be really careful with those issues, but I do think this is part of what it means to demonstrate commitment to children, is to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunities to labor on their behalf. You know, the system's not perfect, right? I became good friends with a guy who was a Jehovah's Witness when I taught up in Cleveland, and he was the janitor. And he was telling me that prior to becoming a Jehovah's Witness, I think he had like 7 or 8 kids, but prior to becoming a Jehovah's Witness, he just lived off the government and had no problem with it and had a part-time job and just petered around. But when he became a Jehovah's Witness, some of his associates there sort of talked to him about the importance of working and earning a living. So he got a full-time job as a janitor at this downtown university I was attending. And he said, "Here I am, cleaning toilets all day long without health insurance for me or for my kids because I got a job. When I didn't have a job, I had health insurance." So the irony in that situation is, in one sense, he provides less for his children by working. That's just the product of a faulty system. And again, I don't know how it's been corrected. That was 12 years ago. I don't know if or how it's been corrected. But that's the product of a faulty system. I think the man still did the right thing in putting himself in a position where he was laboring and he was providing for his children. And I think you just entrust that to the Lord and you find whatever means they can be covered. So when I say provision is generous, I'm talking mainly about the work ethic of the parents in providing for the kids, not the level of living that they give. Okay? Loving pursuit. Loving pursuit. Being affectionately desirous implies pursuit, much like what we talked about from Song of Solomon 7:10. Remember, I'm my beloved's. How do I know that? His desires for me. How do I know his desires for me? Well, he pursues me. That's what the whole book's about. The same principle applies here to children. Desire and pursuit go hand in hand. In other words, parents must relationally engage, not disengage from their children. It's on the onus of the parents to seek out a relationship with their children, not vice versa. It's the onus of the parents to seek out a relationship with their children, not vice versa. So a parent should be warm and receptive when a child enters the room, not cold and uncaring. Now, obviously, sometimes you're working, sometimes, it doesn't mean you drop everything and always give them big hugs and kisses, okay, like we talked about this morning. But my point is, they should know that when you see them, you are delighted to see them. They are a source of joy to you to the point where you pursue and you seek them out. And I've seen parents, and you're going to see parents, who make tons of mistakes and are dumb in so many ways. But But if they're not dumb in pursuing a relationship with their children and really love being around them and forging friendships with them, it's like that covers a multitude of sins. And it really does create a healthy framework. Some of you in here had really good relationships with your parents, and you were confident that they always would love to have you around. You're good friends. That's a wonderful benefit to your soul. Others in you, maybe you didn't have that. Maybe you always felt like you were a pain in the rump to your parents, or they outright rejected you. There's hurt that comes with that. And there's a dissociation that comes. And so it's just an example of how important it is for parents to pursue their children. So let me make a few comments on sort of gender-specific pursuit. Okay? Fathers need to pursue their sons. They need to pursue their sons. They need to commend their sons as men. They need to put their sons in situations that compel them to act in manly ways. Towards maturity, towards work, towards growing up. In other words, dads should pursue their boys in the context of responsibility. Give them responsibilities. And be at their side as they're learning them. That's how you make a man. If you give responsibilities without relational pursuit, then you kind of imply that, this is a big world and it's for you to figure out. If you pursue them relationally without giving them responsibilities, then you act like the world's a playground, right? And that's not what it is either. You pursue them relationally for the purpose of forging a friendship and for building into them the capacities they need to be men. Relational pursuit is so very important. I don't think a dad's affirmation is necessary to the stability of the soul in adulthood. But man alive, if you read our literature and watch our movies, there's a lot of dudes with daddy issues out there, right? You know how many movies there are about trying to earn the respect or high opinion of the dad? I mean, even in kids' movies, it's unbelievable to me. It almost gets to be mopey and weird. But the point, nevertheless, I think there's validity to it, right? The commitment of a father to his son is I don't know. It's like a structure. It's like an iron structure to the soul. It does them well later in life. Dad should also pursue daughters. Dad should also pursue daughters. I really do think dads should tell daughters frequently how beautiful they are. Not to build up their self-esteem. That's not the model I'm talking about. But when a dad tells a daughter they're beautiful, what he's saying is, you're beautiful to me. It's a statement of his opinion of them, his fondness of them, more than it's a statement of their intrinsic beauty. Do you see what I'm saying? When a dad says, I love you and you're beautiful to me, he's saying something about his commitment to the daughter. And that ought to be frequent. There ought to be a lot of commendation of the daughter, affirmation, while you're still honing and teaching her responsibility too. But I know a lot of girls who were more tempted than they otherwise would have been to seek affection from other men, and frankly, other women, because they had dads that were cold and did not pursue them. A friend of mine who has adult children now said something very wise to me. This was years ago, and it struck me. This friend has a few daughters, and he said, I noticed something in raising my daughters. He said, from age 0 to about 9 years old, your daughters want to be around you all the time. They pursue you. They're always excited to see Daddy. They want to jump in his lap. They want to kiss him all over his face. They think Daddy's so amazing, and they always want to be around Daddy. Something happens around 9 or 10 years old, and a shift occurs. And I realized at this point, he said, that I needed to pursue my daughters because they're not naturally going to pursue me. And so what he did was he made sure that he was always available to them and actually being the one proactively seeking them out for regular contact, regular positive contact. And honestly, this guy has as good relationships with his daughters as anyone I've ever seen. And again, it's no guarantee. There's no guarantees here, but these are principles that are sound, that are good. So fathers should pursue daughters. Mothers, okay? Mothers to sons. Mothers should pursue sons in the sense that mothers should also affirm the manhood of their sons, meaning she wants to relate to them. She delights in their presence, of course. But she's not always going to treat them like her babies, okay? In one sense, all boys are always the babies of their mom, and that's awesome, and that should always be the case, right? There's a soft spot in the heart of a mom for her sons. That's wonderful. But what I'm saying by not always treating them like babies is treat them like they ought to take responsibility for the things that the dad's trying to do. So the mom shouldn't merely be a shield for the sons. Pursuing them means pursuing them in ways that are beneficial to their growth and their development. So sons should not have mothers who make their beds when they're preteens. Okay? In my opinion, it shouldn't be happening way earlier than that. Okay? Sons should not have moms that coddle and excuse their foolish behavior. I'm saying this because the tendency of moms, again, there's so many exceptions. We got to be careful with generalities. But moms tend to want to coddle sons more than dads do. And while mom should absolutely be the soft spot, okay, she also has to be on board with the vision of what it means to parent this boy into a man. So what that means is, you respect your son. A mother respects her son by treating him this way. And he knows it. Whether he bristles by that or not, he knows that there's respect there. And I've seen a number of situations, friends, where mothers of adult sons still talk to them in such a way where they have to plot out and plan everything and check in on what they're doing. Hey, did you call the doctor? Did you check up on that? Make sure you haven't changed your tires in a long time. You could have a blowout on the highway. I'll talk to my insurance for that. Let me see if my insurance will cover you for that. These types of arrangement of the details and managing the life of the son, not only do they retard his development, they say something to him. And this is what they say to him. You can't handle this. That's what they say. You can't handle this. They never explicitly say it, but that's what happens when you micromanage a developing man. Okay? He's saying, you can't handle this. And moms need to have the humility of knowing that what it means for me to pursue him is to enjoy the relationship and to build him up towards responsibility. Then moms to daughters. Moms to daughters. Similar to what I said about fathers to sons, moms to daughters are pursuing them to have a best friend, have a confidant. Moms should love to be around their daughters. And moms should raise them with the expectation, we're going to be good friends. I want you to be my friend and to be my confidant, and for us to do things together and trust one another. Sometimes our culture acts like the teenage rebellion years narrative is predetermined and inalterable. So moms don't raise their daughters expecting that those daughters are going to be their friends. They raise their daughters kind of like wincing at the idea of the teenage years coming when the daughter's going to reject them and go do what she wants to do. That should not be the case. We should raise our daughters with the expectation that they're responsible for a friendship here. So pour into them, pursue them relationally in terms of a friendship, and then that's closely related to responsibility. They ought to be entrusted as well with increasing levels of responsibility. And nothing teaches them that responsibility better than a mom who's doing it, than a mom who knows what it means to be a woman in a world that isn't always kind or fair to women. And so we invest in that way through loving pursuit. Then the last sort of subpoint here is consistent discipline. Consistent discipline. So Ephesians 6, verses 1 through 3 says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land." So that's fascinating there, because that's instruction directly from the Apostle Paul to children in the midst of the church who are hearing these letters read. Okay? So that right there is instruction directly to children, but the implication for parents is very clear. Parents should insist on the obedience of their children for the children's sake. It just got done saying all the promises and benefits that come with obedience. And if parents aren't insisting on obedience, children will certainly not insist on obedience. And thus they're robbed of many of the blessings that God would give. So parents who want the promise of God fulfilled for their children will insist on obedience. So just at a 30,000-foot level, just generally what this means is, in the homes of the people that you're counseling, disobedience should be met with consequences. I would even say immediate consequences. Disobedience should be met with immediate consequences. It's always within the context of reception and love, okay? It's always in the context of reception and love. And it's consistent. So, I'm trying to think what would be most helpful for you. I won't get into the whole thing of discipline, but let me just reference for your own study and consideration. Hebrews chapter 12 teaches us a lot about what discipline ought to look like. And one of the main points of Hebrews chapter 12 is that discipline is the sign that you belong. Okay? Discipline is the sign that you belong. That you belong to God. You're His child. You're His possession. And the whole logic of the passage is this. If you weren't disciplined, it would indicate that you are not a son. You're an illegitimate child. Paul Washer tells a really powerful story in one of his sermons about a time when he was a little kid and he went out fishing with his buddies, and his mom said to him, "Do not get close to the water and get muddy. Do not do it." "Okay, Mom." Goes out there, start fishing. If you're a little boy and you're fishing next to a mud hole, it is inevitable that you are going to get in the water and get muddy. So they all get muddy. All the boys are just a muddy mess. They're laughing and chatting and carrying all their stuff back, walking down the street. Paul's mom comes out from the house onto the street, hails this group of boys. She points to one of the boys in that group. She says, "You, come here." And Paul comes out of the group. She takes him back to the house, and he gets punished. I forget what exactly it was, but I think we can assume what the punishment was. He gets punished. And as he's crying in distress and in pain at this punishment, he says, "You didn't talk to any of those other boys. You didn't punish any of them. Why am I the one that get in trouble?" And the mom says, "Because you're my son." God says the same thing to us. Because you're my son, I will discipline you. Because, again, this is the point of Hebrews 12. Because it yields what is beneficial to your soul. In fact, because it yields what is necessary for your soul. And parents who spare the rod, you know this Proverbs, right? Spoil the son. They hate their son because they care more about their own immediate convenience, about not crossing the will of the child, than they do about the child's long-term health and growth. In other words, you should love your children so much that you are willing to cause them pain. So disobedience has to be met with immediate consequences. And here's another point from Hebrews 12. Those consequences should be painful. Okay? It says explicitly in the text, "For the time, all discipline, it seems unpleasant, but it later produces the peaceful fruit of righteousness." Okay? So there's a necessary painfulness or unpleasantness to discipline. And parents, it blows me away. If you want to be consistent in discipline, then the punishments have to actually hurt. Not that you're damaging children, friends. Please, you know that. You know I'm not saying that. If someone damages a child, they should absolutely be prosecuted and legally responsible for that. What I'm talking about is the kind of unpleasantness that reminds them that sin has consequences, okay? So that's what you're doing. Every time a child is disciplined, what you're doing is this. You are giving them a mini day of judgment, okay? It's a mini version of the day of judgment so that they learn sin brings death. Every time you ground them, every time you swat them, every time you go through some careful, loving, formal process of discipline, you are reminding them that disobedience will not make them happy. Disobedience will make them feel pain and will make them sad. There is a day of judgment that is coming. And children who aren't disciplined have no framework for understanding just how incredible mercy is in being spared from judgment. Okay? You're preparing their hearts to understand mercy. You're preparing their appetites to long for mercy by disciplining them. It scares me to death that our society is growing up largely without discipline from parents. That scares me to death. Because what you do is you produce a people who don't have an active, experientially painful association of doing wrong things with being punished. Okay? And it really does something to the sort of psyche, the collective psyche of a culture. And it makes our witness, honestly, a lot harder. Because when we talk about things like judgment, people don't have anything to hang, any prior knowledge to hang that new knowledge on. So it's not impossible. The gospel is powerful. We are going to be fine, right? The gospel is going to be fine. It's going to go out. But it does make us have to think carefully about the unique challenges of talking to a culture that has no conception of what judgment is. So my encouragement to you is make sure your children and make sure the children of those you're counseling know what consequences are. In couples that I've counseled, I've noticed a trend that concerns me a little bit, even in our gospel-centered circles, okay? Gospel-centered parenting sometimes in people's minds looks like this. My kid transgressed the law. He disobeyed. And when I bring him forward to confront him for it, I need to show him mercy by not punishing him. Because, the logic goes, Jesus took my punishment for my sin so that I would never experience it. And so showing mercy to my children means I spare him from the punishment that he deserves. I just need to make it very clear to him that he deserves it and that he's not going to then get it, and he'll understand what mercy is. That is ridiculous. That is not how you teach a kid to love mercy. They need to understand what judgment is in order to truly want mercy. That's not the logic of the gospel. So we bring it to them and we spank them or we ground them or we do whatever it is that in our convictions and in our trying to be faithful to Scripture we determine to do. We make sure that it's unpleasant. We make sure that it's painful. We do not spare them from that punishment so that they, again, are reinforced in their conviction that sin leads to death. So that when you do introduce Jesus to them, and you talk about a final day where death is the final issue for your transgression, and that Jesus can spare you from that death, Jesus looms large in their mind. So, consistent discipline. Where you see homes that don't have consistent discipline, it does contribute to the troubles and the problems of the inner dynamic of the relationships as a whole. Okay, so keep your eyes out for that and use Hebrews 12 to motivate that. Okay, all right. Let's keep going here. Another goal for the parent. Prepare the child for responsibility in the roles God has called them to in family, in community, and in vocation. So the hope is that children would be equipped for service and for success in the relationships and responsibilities of life. I'll give you a chance to get that all down. So what I'm getting at with these points is you want part of the necessary responsibility and goal for a parent is to invest in a good citizen. You want your child to be a good citizen. And I'm talking like not just citizen of your country, but citizen of a family, citizen of the church. You want them to be a contributor because that's what they're commanded to be. That's who we're forming and what we're investing in. So these are kind of different aspects of what it means to be a good citizen. So in their family, first of all, in their family. Your kids have certain responsibilities to each other. And children have certain responsibilities to their parents. I've noticed that parents sometimes get into a mode of parenting their children as if they were individuals on an individual trajectory of growth. And of course, we recognize the uniqueness of each child. But my point is, they are integrated into a family unit. So, when one kid falls and skins their knee, the expectation of the family should be not just that mommy or daddy goes to comfort them. The expectation should be, son, you have a responsibility when your little sister falls and skins her knee, you take care of her. Be a man. Love her. Care for her. Nurture her. Or, older sister, when your little brother skins his knee, look at him. He's crying. He's really upset. Go serve him in that way. Pick him up. Get him the Band-Aid that he's going to demand. And if he demands that it's, Lego instead of Batman, tell him too bad. Put the Lego one on him. But the point is, you want to hold children to a conception of their responsibility in community. And it begins in the family. They're responsible for one another. When one of them has made a huge mess, all of them need to help pick up. Now, not all the time, right? There are times when one of them intentionally made the mess and it was sort of an attitude issue, and you say, dude, you are picking that one up. You and you alone are doing it. But the point is, you want to build into children a sense of community responsibility in terms of the family. The same thing up to the parents. So there are times where it's very appropriate for a father to say to a son, did you see how when you walked in here and dropped all your stuff like that, your mother had to go by and pick up all that stuff? Son, that woman is my woman. And she's not going to follow you and pick up your stuff. She is your mother. You respect her by picking up. So when you're saying things like that, instead of just pick up your pick up your toys, son, or pick up the stuff you just dropped, son, you're doing a better job, I think, of framing why he needs to pick his stuff up in relationship to the family in which he exists. So, responsibility and roles in family, I think in community as well. I think we're still growing personally as a family in this, but I've seen other families do a great job at this, of making it clear to the children that they should be aware of their neighbors and aware of the people around them. So we don't just live life kind of furiously jumping from our activity to this other activity of ours to this other activity of ours, but you live with a general awareness of the needs of the people around you. This has an evangelistic function, but it also has just a citizenship function, okay? So a lot of families are really good at getting their kids involved in local politics or policy issues, having them attend different meetings and understand what it means to live in community. Some of those things kind of are going above and beyond. I don't think they're required, but my point is, part of preparing a child and developing them is making them aware of the responsibilities of their community outside the home. And then also, I think you want to prepare them for responsibility in terms of their vocation. In other words, you got to teach kids how to work, how to be good workers. Think about this. You love the world around you when you produce a good worker. Okay? Someone who understands what it means to be at work on time, to put in an honest day's labor, to put in your best efforts, to know when's the appropriate time to rest and when's not, to learn what it means to develop a skill over many, many, many years, and to pick up things that you're not good at for the purpose of getting good at them, and being patient with the development process of skills. If you produce kids like that, you are loving and serving this world, because vocation is very important. So, dads should take their sons to work. Dads should involve their kids in what they do. Moms should take their sons or their daughters to work or around the home or whatever they're doing. they should expect their sons and daughters to do well at school. I don't mean they should expect straight A's from their kids or they should punish them if they're not the head of the class. What I'm talking about doing well is they put forth their best efforts at school, even when it's boring. Even when it's boring and they're disinterested. A very wise teacher of mine, one of my elementary school teachers, he one time said to me, he's like, you know what, kids? The key to success is the ability to keep at something, to keep at a job that's extremely boring to you. That's the key to success. Doing things that are boring, knowing that they will benefit yourself and others in the end. That's awesome. That's a perfect thing to say to kids in our generation and under, because we're bored by everything that's not video games and dinging and blinking at us, okay? Life is boring compared to this modified world that we can have that all these kids are growing up on. So you want to teach them what it means to do things well that they don't immediately see the point of. That's what it means to be trained well in a vocation, to excel there. Okay? All right, let me shoot down just a couple secondary goals. Okay, so those were the primary ones. Those are the ones where I think it's mission critical in terms of what it means to raise your child in a biblical way. Here's some secondary goals. These aren't mission critical. In other words, if you don't do these things, you can still consider yourselves to have had good goals in parenting, but these are important. So, one goal, maximize opportunity for the highest quality education and vocational training. The hope is that children would excel according to their particular gifts, desires, and opportunities. I put this secondarily, guys, because not all of us can afford or have access to the best schools. So personally, in our family, we put a lot of money towards good education, but in part that's because we're just in a season where that's possible, at least for the time being, and there's a really good school available. But if we ever got a job transfer or if we were in a different spot in life, you may not have the margin to do that, or you might not have a good school around. So this is why this is secondary. But the point is, for your situation, you're thinking carefully about what it means to prepare your child for the future. And if you're already doing the primary goal of teaching them to be a good citizen, a good hard worker, you've pretty much solved this other one, right? Wherever they end up, this is just a good principle. It's not a promise, but it's a principle. Wherever it is you end up, if you're a hard worker and you're careful at the work, you're going to excel. Okay? You guys are probably already getting the second one down there. Train a child to master various skill sets. Music, instrumental or vocal, athletics, logic games, rhetoric, debate, writing. These are just things I'm throwing in there, okay? Teach a skill. The hope for the child is that children would benefit in their success and enjoyment of life from mastering their skill sets. It's not just about achievement at this point. It's about actually enjoying life. You know how fun it is to sit down and do a jam session with your friends who all have like guitars or stringed instruments? That is so fun. And you only get to the point of enjoying that fun by mastering a skill enough to be able to do it. Same is true with any sort of logic game, chess that you have. These types of things add to the enjoyment of life. I think they are worthwhile in that. And they also add to sort of the roundedness of making one successful. So here's a tip. it's not, it seems to me that it's not just about finding the right training, okay, in any one of these things. It seems to me that it's rather about setting things that are worthy in front of your children to master, and then having them persevere at it. Things that are worthy in front of them, which requires, here's where I'm getting at, it requires you to keep things that are unworthy from occupying their time. To keep things that are unworthy from occupying their time. We are fighting the external family right now about whether our kids can be given for Christmas. I was about to say Game Boy. That shows the era that I grew up in. You know what Game Boys are, right? The handheld. Whatever they are now. The Nintendo DS or whatever it is. Guys, please hear me. I'm not anti-video game. We've talked about video games already in here, but I'm not anti-video game. I'm just simply trying to do the equation. What produces excellence? What produces something that is truly enjoyable in the lasting, satisfying sense? And if I hand my kids amusements and let them submerge themselves in a practice that doesn't teach real skills. And you know what? I've heard the whole hand-eye coordination argument so many times. I used it with my parents when I grew up playing Nintendo. That's garbage. It's garbage. Now, there are creative elements to some of these things, and I think there is legitimacy there in some respects. But my point is that hours and hours and hours and hours doing something that doesn't master or hone a skill is not as good as doing something that does. So try to teach your kids, this is very countercultural, but try to teach your kids to take satisfaction in the types of amusements, to take enjoyment in the types of things that have a redeeming value to them, a redeeming skill set to them. Even soccer and baseball, outside sports, chess, instrument playing. I wish I could exchange all those hours of playing computer games as a young teenager for practicing the guitar. I just wish I could have. And kids aren't mature enough to see that now, so you need to see it for them. Another goal. Demonstrate a love of reading and storytelling and compel children to master the skills of listening well and understanding texts. Now, admittedly, this is being written by a former literature professor, okay? So this one's a little idiosyncratic specifically to me, all right? But I actually would argue that it's wider just than people who like books. There is something to the mastery of understanding narrative and being moved by it and being able to associate it with certain things in one's own life that I think is important. It's an important part of the development of the mind. Because the hope for the child is that children would learn to have a grand vision of the world and develop sensibilities to the nuances of life by utilizing their God-given imaginations. So, I just got done listening on audiobooks to David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Has anybody read that or had to read that? There's a free recording of it actually on audiobooks.com, which is an app you can get on Android or iPhone. It's read by this guy named Ty Kynes. It's fantastic. And the way Dickens talks about the nuances of human dynamics and the little insights of how people relate to each other and sets some characters up as mysterious and vile, and other characters up as just examples of strength in opposition. It's inspiring, and it teaches the contours of life, really, really well, very efficiently. And I think we do well to expose our kids to that. But I'm not going to go off into that too much because this is not an apologetics for literature course, okay? And then, so those are just some secondary goals that come to mind. And then just to give you an example of a tertiary goal, just so you have it, again, notice what I write here. Really, when you get down to tertiary goals especially, you're just getting to an area where it's very specific to the parent and the child. These are just suggestions, right? But a goal for the parent in a tertiary way could be to pay for college, right? That's what I'm saying here. That's just one example. I don't list tertiary goals because they're just too person specific or family specific. But if you can, it's a good thing to have as a goal to be able to pay for college or secure some means of training for the child. Not all of us are going to be able to do that. So that's why we make it a tertiary goal and not a primary goal like some parents would want to put it in. And then they put the pressure on themselves to make sure that they're able to pay for the school. Or if they're able to pay for the school, they pat themselves on the back like they've been a good parent just because they're able to pay for their kids' college, right? That's not what we want.